The fire was already dying when Officer Daniel Harper kicked through what used to be his front door. Smoke clung to the walls like guilt that refused to leave. On the floor lay his little girl, unconscious, ash on her hair like someone had tried to erase her. Beside her, a gray-brown canine, Hunter, burned and bleeding, because he'd fought the flames to reach her first. Days later, they would discover the fire wasn't meant to kill Emma. It was meant to silence him, and the only witness had recorded the truth without even knowing. Subscribe if you believe some heroes protect justice without ever speaking, only staying. A quiet winter night, heavy with mist. The smell of pine and cold asphalt lingered under the weak glow of street lamps. Rain had begun earlier, barely more than a whisper on the windshield of a patrol car as it slowed behind an abandoned warehouse. Officer Daniel Harper, 39, stepped out into the drizzle, wearing only a Navy police shirt clinging to his shoulders. He had the look of a man hardened by years on the job. Tall, solid, jaw rough from hurried shaving. His voice was steady, though tired, when he gave the command. Beside him moved Hunter, a 7-year-old German shepherd with gray-brown fur, tail low, gaze sharp, nose tracing smoke before the wind carried it away. They were chasing a man who liked fire too much, so much that lives burned with it. Daniel had spent months studying ashes, trying to understand the mind behind flames. Tonight, they had cornered him. The suspect bolted from the door, thin and frantic, his jacket stained with chemicals. Daniel ran after him without shouting. No threats, no warnings, just the heavy breath of a man who had known too many funerals caused by someone else's match. Hunter sprinted ahead, cutting through puddles. His paws slapped the ground with the certainty of instinct. In seconds, the dog brought the man down, jaws gripping the sleeve, not the flesh. Daniel cuffed him without triumph. Rain soaked them, but there was no relief. Sometimes catching evil felt no different than breathing it in. Then came the phone call. A tremor cut through the rhythm of the night. Daniel answered with the indifference of duty, but his face changed before he spoke a word. He stood very still, hand tightening around the wet device. His house, his home, was burning. A voice on the other end yelled that his daughter might still be inside. The world around him fell silent, even though sirens wailed far away and the cuffed man laughed through cracked lips. Daniel didn't argue, didn't think. He grabbed Hunter and drove faster than law allowed, rain blurring into streaks of silver against the windshield. Every mile felt like a sin, remembered too late. By the time he arrived, flames had already swallowed the roof. Neighbors screamed. Firefighters held him back until a window shattered and smoke curled out like a dying breath. Daniel forced his way inside, calling his daughter's name, but smoke answered. He found Emma, small and limp, her light blue shirt stained with soot, her hair tangled in heat and fear. He carried her out with the desperation of a man who had just found the reason for his life slipping away. He didn't notice his wife's body being covered by a blanket. He didn't notice Hunter injured, paws burned from rushing into the blaze. All he saw was a child lying too still. Daniel sat on the pavement, rain washing ash from her cheeks. There were no words, only the faint, fragile rhythm of her breathing and a thought heavier than smoke. He had caught a man who burned homes, while his own was burning. Some fires don't end with water. Some fires live on inside the ones who survive. The hospital corridor lay under dim yellow lights. Everything smelled of disinfectant and wet clothing. Daniel sat beside Emma's bed, shoulders bent as if the weight of the smoke still clung to him. His navy shirt was wrinkled, stained with ash he hadn't washed away. Reporters had already started calling. Questions came like bullets, sharp, loud, careless. A detective from another unit had stood outside the room just hours earlier, speaking to Sergeant Cole Maddox, Daniel's commanding officer. Maddox, 45, with sun-worn skin and gray streaks tugging at his temples, looked like a man carved from duty. He listened, jaw tight, hands folded behind his back. His voice, when he finally spoke, was steady but distant. Follow protocol. No exceptions. Daniel understood what those words meant. When a cop's home burns down the same night he catches an arsonist, suspicion becomes oxygen, and everyone breathes it. Nurse Olivia Brooks came by to check Emma's vitals. She was in her early 30s, wearing a teal uniform and white slip-on shoes, hair tied low beneath a tired face. Yet her movements were careful, almost gentle, like someone patching a child's favorite toy. She didn't pry or question. She simply whispered, "She's holding on," as if that truth could steady a drowning man. Daniel nodded, though his throat closed against gratitude. Emma lay motionless, her light blue shirt still faintly smelling of smoke. Hunter sat on the floor by her feet, gray-brown fur ruffled in tired clumps, paws wrapped with gauze. The big dog refused to rest. His ears twitched at every sound, his chest rising and falling with slow vigilance. When Daniel reached to touch him, Hunter didn't look away from the girl he had carried through fire. Later, when the hallway emptied, Hunter began pawing at Emma's scorched backpack. He did it slowly at first, then with a low growl, as if warning someone who wasn't there. Daniel frowned. He pulled the backpack closer. Inside, beneath the smell of melted fabric, he found an old mini camcorder, one his late wife had used long before smartphones. Its metal casing was warm, covered in soot. The screen wouldn't turn on. Still, Daniel held it like a relic. A piece of his wife's laughter returned from smoke. Hunter pressed his nose against the device and whined. Not from pain, but insistence. The dog knew something. Or maybe he remembered something Daniel had forgotten. Some truths survive fire. Daniel looked at his unconscious daughter, then at the small camera resting in his palm. He didn't know yet what it had seen, but he knew it hadn't come back for nothing. "Thank you," he whispered, not to fate, not to God, but to a child who might have tried to warn him. Some witnesses don't speak, but they still tell the truth. Morning sunlight tried to enter through the hospital window, but the glass was fogged with breath and cold. Daniel wiped the small camcorder with the edge of his sleeve. His fingers shook, not from fear, but from touching something that belonged to two people he loved. One silent on the bed, one gone to smoke. He searched for a charger, but the battery still held a sliver of life. With Hunter resting at his boots, Daniel pressed play. A static cough filled the room. Then the screen flickered, shaky and childish, like a memory trying to find its way back. The first image was Emma's laughter, close to the camera, too close. Her freckles blurred into light as she waved at her own reflection, hair messy, the smile of someone who believed mornings were always safe. Then she pointed toward her bedroom window. "I'm making a movie," she whispered, pretending secrecy. The picture zoomed far out across their quiet street. Cracked sidewalks, an old oak tree bending slightly toward their porch. The house Daniel worked hard to afford, but rarely enjoyed. The frame wobbled as she tried to steady the camera. Instinctively, Daniel whispered, "Easy, sweetheart." The room answered with silence, except for Hunter's soft breathing. Then the camera lingered on a shape outside. A man stood beside a silver van, shoulder hunched, head lowered. His clothes were ordinary, dark jacket, jeans, boots worn at the heel. But his posture carried something patient and practiced. He wasn't walking or delivering or passing by. He was attaching something beneath the gas line. Emma's voice, innocent and curious, filled the room. "Who's that guy? He looks kind of scary. But maybe he's fixing something." Daniel froze. The camera zoomed again, too close, catching the edge of the man's face. Not enough to name him, enough to know him. A professional. Someone who didn't panic. Someone hired. Emma giggled in the recording. She didn't understand danger. She just wanted a good shot for her movie. Daniel let the footage play until the battery died mid-frame, the man's hand blurred over metal, a quiet crime posing as maintenance. He set the camcorder down gently. His pulse was slow, but his breath came heavy. This wasn't a random fire. Someone paid for it. Someone planned it. Someone who knew he wouldn't be home. His own work had made him vulnerable. His loyalty had marked his doorstep. Hunter lifted his head and nudged Daniel's wrist, as if to ground him. Daniel rested his palm on the dog's warm fur, feeling the tremor of life beneath it. He whispered with no anger, only truth. She saw what I didn't. A child's curiosity had caught a killer, and her innocence might save them now. Snow had started falling outside the hospital, slow and quiet, as if trying not to disturb the world. Daniel sat alone in a small briefing room down the hall. The lights hummed overhead, too bright for such a tired morning. Sergeant Cole Maddox entered with a heavy folder tucked beneath his arm. His face, already marked by age and long winters, seemed older today. He wasn't angry, only burdened. He laid the folder on the table and spoke in a voice that held more air than sound. The arsonist talked. Daniel didn't look at him at first. He waited, like a man bracing for the cold, before stepping outdoors. Maddox pulled out a report, lines of black ink smearing truths too large to fit on paper. The fire wasn't meant to kill Emma. It was meant to kill Daniel. The men he had been investigating, a trafficking ring, had paid for the flames. The arsonist had been just a tool. The real threat was organized, patient, and unbothered by children sleeping in their beds. Daniel felt no outrage, only a heaviness, the kind that bends a man's spine without him noticing. Maddox continued. The garage had been the real target. A hard drive there contained video evidence, footage Daniel had collected over years. The goal wasn't to punish him for what he knew, it was to erase it. They didn't expect her, Maddox said, glancing toward the hallway where Emma slept behind walls and medicine. Daniel understood. His daughter's recording was a coincidence to him, but a threat to the people who feared the camera more than the police badge. She had captured a truth she didn't mean to find, and her mind, seeing danger with no name, had simply shut down in fear. The doctor had called it psychogenic shock, the brain locking its own door. Daniel closed his eyes. He imagined Emma at the window, filming for fun, giggling at her movie, thinking nothing bad could happen in a house with her father's badge hanging by the door. She wasn't a witness trying to speak. She was a child who didn't know she had already spoken. He whispered more to himself than to Maddox. She tried to call for me, and I wasn't there. Hunter waited at the doorway, ears tilted forward. He didn't move, didn't whine, just watched his partner wrestle with a truth heavier than law. Daniel reached for the dog, resting a hand on his warm neck. His voice trembled, but held no anger, only regret that had nowhere to go. "I'll finish what she accidentally started," he murmured. He didn't say it like a vow. He said it like a father coming home too late, but still coming home. The hospital slept under hushed fluorescent light, a winter moon fading against the glass. ICU hallways were quiet at this hour, quiet in a way that made every cough, every distant radio murmur feel louder than truth. Emma lay still beneath warm blankets, her small chest rising in slow, uneven breaths. Machines blinked like distant city lights, steady, repetitive, meant to reassure. Daniel had stepped out briefly with Sergeant Maddox to sign paperwork. his body heavy, mind scattered. He trusted the quiet. He trusted the walls, the locks, the cameras. But the trouble that hunts children does not fear doors. Hunter lay at Emma's bedside, gray-brown fur reflecting a curl of moonlight. He had not slept in 2 days. His paws were wrapped, his body exhausted, but instinct in him stayed awake. When the door to the ICU cracked open, he lifted his head slowly, like an old warrior remembering battle. A man stepped in wearing scrubs, face half-shadowed beneath hospital lighting. His shoes were clean, too clean. His movements lacked the gentle hesitation familiar to anyone who works with human pain. He reached for Emma's drawer, not Emma. Inside it lay the burnt camcorder tape, sealed in evidence plastic. Hunter growled, not loud, not yet. A low rumble, like thunder hiding in distant clouds. The stranger froze for a moment, then continued. His hand brushed the bag. Hunter lunged. The crash of metal tray filled the silence. The intruder shoved a needle down into Hunter's shoulder. Fast, brutal, a sedative meant to quiet him. But the dog did not quiet. Even as his legs shook, he bit down hard on the fabric of the man's sleeve, tearing it open. Security answered the alarm, boots slamming down the hallway. Before they restrained him, the man hissed through his teeth, voice as thin as broken wire. The girl should have stayed silent from the start. Hunter collapsed at Emma's feet, heartbeat weak, sedation flooding him like a dark tide. His body trembled once, twice, then went still, except for the faintest growl caught in his throat, a stubborn echo refusing to die. That sound reached Emma before any doctor did. It rose into her sleep like a memory, like the heat of a fire, like fear she could not explain. On the monitor, her brain waves surged upward, jagged and urgent, as if her mind remembered something just enough to fight its way back. Daniel arrived too late to stop any of it. He fell to his knees beside Hunter, holding the dog's heavy head, tears falling not from sorrow, but from recognition. This animal had protected his family twice now, once in flames, once in silence. Emma's monitor pulsed louder. The dog never spoke, but he had warned them just the same. Dawn filtered through pale blinds, carrying a cold light that felt honest, almost unforgiving. Daniel stood beside Emma's bed, a cup of untouched coffee cooling between his hands. The room was quiet except for the gentle hum of machines, blinking their slow and patient rhythm. Hunter lay on a folded blanket near the foot of the bed, breathing heavily from the sedative but still watching her with half-open eyes, as if he refused to sleep before she woke. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and warm cloth. It was a scent of waiting, the kind that wears on the bones. Daniel wasn't wearing his badge. He had left it in his pocket like a stone too heavy to carry. Today, duty meant something different. He sat beside his daughter, brushing hair away from her forehead, with a hand that had broken down doors, held weapons, lifted strangers from danger. Yet it trembled when touching a child. It should have known better. Emma looked small under the blankets, her face soft, her breathing steady but distant, like she was hiding somewhere behind her own eyes. The doctors said her coma was partly fear, partly shock, her mind shutting a door it didn't know how to open again. Daniel understood now. She wasn't sleeping. She was protecting herself from the world he had failed to keep safe. He held her hand gently, fingers closing around hers as if asking permission. His voice, when it came, was low and stripped of every excuse his badge had ever offered him. "I wasn't there," he whispered. "I chose the mission, and it cost your mother." His throat tightened, but he didn't look away. "You weren't wrong to be scared. You weren't weak. You protected this family more than I did when you picked up that camera." He wiped her knuckles with his thumb, slow as prayer. "You don't have to do that alone anymore. I'm here now, not as a cop, as your dad." Hunter lifted his head and gave a soft whine, tail brushing once against the floor. Daniel lowered his other hand to touch the dog's fur, sharing the apology with him too. "You saved her. he murmured. "Both of you did." There was no anger left inside him, only gratitude and a regret that no punishment could erase. His voice softened into a promise. "You're safe. I won't let you be alone again." For a moment, nothing changed. Then, a quiet beep. Another. The monitor line steadied, rising into smooth waves, stronger than before. Her brain activity settled, not in panic, but in recognition. Emma didn't wake, but she heard him, and fear began to loosen its hold. Rain tapped gently against the hospital window. Not loud, but steady, like someone knocking without urgency. The room held a quiet that didn't feel empty. It felt fragile. Emma lay beneath soft blankets, her eyelashes still, her breath light enough to disappear if one blinked too long. Daniel stood beside her with his badge still in his pocket instead of on his chest. A doctor in his late 50s, gray hair tucked behind his ears, spoke softly. His voice was gentle, patient, the kind that comes from decades of watching bodies fight and minds retreat. He suggested they try something different, not medicine, not stimulation, but a memory, a safe one. Sometimes a child wakes up when they return to where they last felt protected, he said. The words lingered, carrying a quiet hope. Daniel listened, unsure whether hope was something he deserved. He remembered the sound. A routine so ordinary, it disappeared into daily life. Before every shift, before rushing into danger, Daniel would whistle, a short, sharp call for Hunter, who would run to his side ready to work. Emma would laugh at the ritual. She would wrap her arms around Hunter's neck, sleeping against him, listening to that whistle like a lullaby. It wasn't just a command. It was home. It was the sound that told her father was still here, still protecting someone. Daniel stepped closer to her bed. He held a small police whistle in his palm, the metal cool, heavier than he remembered. His hand shook, not from fear, but from understanding how many times he had blown it without thinking who else it was calling. He raised it to his lips and whistled. Just once, a sound crisp and clean, cutting through the thick quiet of the ICU. Hunter lifted his head, though his body was still weak, sedation fading like fog. The gray-brown dog rose slowly, paws trembling, and placed his head softly against Emma's chest, exactly where she used to hold him at night. That warmth traveled through her like a memory stepping into the room. Emma's fingers moved first, small and unsure. Then her shoulders shook, lips parting as a soft cry escaped, a cry that didn't belong to fear this time. Her eyes opened, wet with tears that seemed to come from someplace deeper than sleep. "I heard Hunter calling," she whispered, voice fragile as wind. "Then I heard you say I was a hero." Daniel didn't speak. He simply held her hand with both of his, as if he was afraid to let her go again. Hunter's tail brushed weakly against the sheets. No words of apology were needed now. She had returned because she believed she was worth protecting, and belief, once given, could be held like life itself. A clear morning washed the hospital halls with pale, forgiving sunlight. The world outside had begun moving again. News reports, court files, statements, a slow flood of truth. The scorched tape Emma had unknowingly recorded exposed the network behind the fire. The trial was swift. Testimonies, digital evidence, and the confession of the hired arsonist revealed how they had targeted Daniel to silence the investigation he was building. And at the end of it all, Daniel Harper stood not as a suspect, but as a man cleared, respected, and awarded for vigilance beyond his shift. Yet honor felt different now. He took his badge with gratitude, but it stayed in his desk drawer more often than before. He chose different hours, not shorter, just more human. He learned that justice had no value if it abandoned the people who called him Dad. Hunter healed slowly. The gray-brown dog moved with the stiffness of an aging warrior, but carried himself like nothing was missing. His presence in the hospital became a quiet remedy. Parents whispered thanks as he rested his head on the laps of trembling children, letting them cry into his fur without fear of judgment. Daniel was approached by nurses, social workers, and 2 teachers from the local elementary school. They saw what Emma had awakened from. A call, not from medicine, but from trust. Together, the small group proposed a program where working dogs could help children recover from trauma. Daniel did not need time to consider. His answer came from the same place his daughter had returned from. A promise he would not leave anyone alone in the dark again. They named it SOS K9, Silent of Support. At its opening, a small crowd gathered in a modest community hall. No banners, no cameras, just folding chairs, warm light, and families who knew fear too well. Emma, wearing a pale blue sweater, stood at the microphone with her hands trembling around her note card. She didn't read it. Instead, she hugged Hunter's leg, the way she had long before tragedy found them. "I didn't wake up because of medicine," she said softly. "I didn't wake up because of machines or doctors." Her voice wavered gently. "I woke up because a hero didn't leave me behind. A hero who doesn't need words, only to stay." Daniel tried to hold himself together, but fatherhood softened his edges more than duty ever could. He wrapped his arms around his daughter and the dog who had guarded her like a knight made of quiet loyalty. Hunter leaned into them, silent as always. Yet his steady gaze held something fierce, something protective, as if watching over a world small enough to defend and large enough to matter. In that silence, their family felt whole again. When life breaks suddenly, it can feel like the world forgets you, families scattered, promises burned down like a house in the night. But remember this, love can return in the quietest ways. Sometimes it comes on 4 paws, sometimes in a child's small voice calling you home. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't shout or demand attention. It simply stays, like a loyal companion guarding your heart until you're ready to stand again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to join our family of listeners.